And if you guys would, let's go and look at our sermon slide. Today we're going to be in our second week of messages out of the book Song of Songs. And I love this book because, A, it's one that almost nobody ever talks about. And part of that is that there is some more risque content in it. It talks about a somewhat controversial subject in our culture, sex and relationships. So this is going to be a fun one to go through. Last week we started this message series and we started to hear about this young couple, this young Hebrew couple. As we read the text, it seems that both of them are shepherds. And as I told you last week, I want to warn you as we read through this, with the Song of Songs, as you go through it, it reads a lot like a script without a setting. And so I want to warn you that we're going to hear dialogue, and at points we're going to have to infer what's actually happening in the plot line. And I think that the reason that this was done this way is because the dialogue that we hear, the conversation that we hear, and the emotions that are flowing through that are pretty universal for human beings in their relationships and the kind of feelings that we have as we start a relationship. Last week we saw this couple that we suspect at this point are already engaged, as would have been the Hebrew tradition to start off the sort of courting phase of their relationship. And they are already beginning to fall head over heels with each other. And one of the things we talked about last week was one of the big reasons that this young couple has gotten there is because they have heard about the integrity that the other person has. They've heard about the other person's reputation. And we discussed last week how character is key. And this week, we're going to discuss a really important relationship dynamic. And it's going to be one heading into Valentine's Day this Friday that will be a good one to focus on. But it's something that's true even of dating relationships, of marriage relationships, but it's even true of friendships. And the principle will actually carry through to most human relationships you have. So today we're going to be in chapter 2. And if you have a Bible, you can turn to Song of Songs, chapter 2. Depending on your Bible, it might be called Song of Solomon or Solomon's Song of Songs. But you can turn to chapter 2, or you grab the Bible from the seat in front of you. It will be on page 673, so you can feel free to turn there. While you're finding your way to Song of Songs chapter 2, I just want to share with you a brief story from the Pounds family household this weekend. And if any of you don't know, we have 5 kids under 5, so we have lots of entertainment in our house. And our 2 twin girls, they're small enough that they aren't engaged in the dialogue. They're only 6 months old, so they're not engaged in the dialogue as much. But this last week, Annabelle was talking with the kids, and they were about to pray, and each of them was going to pray before the meal. And Dad was at work, so he missed this, but Annabelle recounted it for me. And Annabelle asked them each to think of one thing that they were thankful for. And so Hudson, our just-turned 2-year-old son, he said, "My water bottle." And he really likes his Nalgene water bottle. It's evidence that he does carry it everywhere he goes with him. And I guess he's a big hydration fan because he's always drinking that thing out. Maybe he just wants us to have to buy more diapers. I don't know. But then Hazel had her turn, and what was she thankful for? And she said her 10 princesses. She has 10 little Disney princess figurines, and these are her most precious possession that she keeps up on her bed away from her brothers so they can't touch it. And Marlo, our 3-year-old, he piped in next, and he said, "For my muscles, so I can fight the bad guys." So Marlo has a different thing he's happy for. We have been talking to him about how God gave him strength, not so he can bully his siblings, because he's already stronger than his sisters, but so that he can protect and provide for people and be strong when God needs him to. So at least he's got the right paradigm. Anyway, like I said, we're in Song of Songs, chapter 2. So let's go ahead and turn there. As we usually do, you guys, as we study through these passages, we're gonna read a section of it. In this week's case, we're going to break our passage down into 3 parts, and then we'll stop and we'll discuss it. And this week, we're actually going to dig a little bit deeper. We're actually going to go back and review almost verse by verse to talk about the meaning here. And part of that is because Song of Songs is poetic language. And so there's a lot of poetic imagery here that as we read it, it might not immediately click as to what it means. And I hope that as we discuss it, God will bring it to life for you, and you'll be able to take something great home with you through that. So we will be again, Song of Songs, chapter 2, and we'll begin today by reading verses 1 through 7. Before we begin that, I'll ask you if you would please join me for just a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together and study your word. Lord, we thank you that we have this occasion to celebrate the generosity of your people and how they are so supportive of the church, and also to celebrate people making new steps in their relationship with you. In these moments, though, Lord, as we read your word, I ask that you would just open our hearts. I know that you want to speak to us through this. And yet, if we're honest, we're easily distracted. So I pray that you would move in our hearts, that you'd help us to see you more clearly, and to live our lives more each day in light of you. I pray this in Jesus Christ's name and prayer. Amen. Okay, so Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 1 through 7. I am a rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys. He, like a lily among thorns, is my darling among the young women. She, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisins, and refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head. His right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. Okay, now as we've read through this, we've seen that there is some small theme here of the shepherdess, the woman seeming to think less of herself, and she's spoken about some of her insecurities in chapter 1. And as we begin in here in chapter 2, we see a similar contrast. She begins by saying, I'm a rose of the Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And she's in a sense saying, I'm just one flower among many. The rose of Sharon is a type of flower, it's a type of lily. And in the pastures of the ancient Near East, when things were in bloom, you could walk out and you could see thousands of these lilies sprouting out. And so in effect, she's saying right off the bat, boy, I know you're saying so much good stuff about me, but I'm just one flower in a whole field of them. I'm nothing that particular. And he has a choice here. He could say, oh, you're probably right. That probably wouldn't win him a lot of points, though, right? Might not be a smart move. And so he, by contrast, goes back and in a sense, corrects what he says, and how he feels about her. So verse 2, he says, like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women. In other words, when I look at you, I don't just see one flower in a giant field of flowers. I see the only flower that matters. You are so beautiful, you're so special, that you make every other flower seem like a thorn by comparison. So his feelings for her are growing more and more. He's affirming her even when she speaks her insecurities out. And now she goes on and she uses a poetic metaphor to talk about herself. Verse 3, she says, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among men. There's this same sort of metaphor. If I'm a special thorn, or a special rose among 1,000 different thorns, then you are like a whole forest of trees, and yet in the midst of that forest is one very special tree, an apple tree that bears fruit, that I can sustain myself off of, that I can take joy in, that I can sit under the shade of. There's all these different aspects playing into this metaphor. And she says she delights herself to sit in his shade, to taste his fruit. And in verse 4, she says, let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Have you guys ever been around two people, and maybe you're just meeting for the first time, and you can sense right off the bat that these two people don't really care for each other? Been there, right? Kind of awkward, right? And maybe even it's a first date or something, and maybe you've even been on one of these dates long, long ago, but you go out and the person gets there and they're like, well, it's nice to see you. I'm going to go talk to my friends over here. You go ahead and do whatever. Kind of awkward, right? And so here she's saying, I don't want to have that experience. I want to go into the banquet hall. I want to go where all of our community members are gathered together. They're having this social time. And when we get there, I want the word love to be like a giant banner over me. This refers back almost to the military type terminology. If you would go under the banner of somebody, if Alexander the Great was your military leader, then his banner would run over you. It would show that that's your defining thing, that you were one of his soldiers. In this case, she says, when we go out into this banquet hall, when we go meet people, the banner that I want to see over me, that I hope he'll present over me, is the banner of love. That he'll be walking around doting on me saying, have you met her? Wow, hey, come over here, you've got to meet this girl. She's incredible. And that's the kind of there that she is anticipating. She's seeing the love that he has for her, and she's hoping not just that he'll say that to her in private, but that it'll be obvious in public when they're out and about. And this is a natural desire to have in relationships. We all want that, right? If we're spending time around friends, we hope they won't introduce us as, hey, this is some guy I know. but instead that they do it favorably. You know, this is my best friend. This is, oh man, this guy is so great. Or this girl is so great. And so here, you know, her desire is that hope that he'll have that delight in her, not just in their private conversation, but also when they're out among other people. Now, in verse 5, she starts to talk about, she's going to describe here that she's feeling weak from love, that she's feeling overwhelmed with this sense of infatuation or deep romance that she's having for him. And she says, strengthen me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. You guys ever felt that feeling where you started to actually feel faint from the person you're around? You're so amazed at the circumstances. Maybe that sense of butterflies in your stomach is kicking up enough that you're actually starting to feel somewhat physically weak from it, not sure what to do. Here, she's echoing that sentiment. That's how I feel, and I almost need to eat something because this is just hitting me so hard, the feelings of affection she has for him. And now, she begins to fantasize about where this relationship could go. It starts to move beyond the platonic in her imagination. And so she gives us this imagery. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. She's starting to think of what it's going to be like to make out with this guy, right? What it's going to be like to suddenly have this physical intimacy. And it's not happening yet, but she just imagining this social event and the love that he has for her and the things that he says about her, says, I want to be in that situation. Oh man, he would come up to me afterwards, he'd stick his left arm under my head, his right arm would embrace me, and soon we would join together and have this deep moment with each other. And with this, interestingly, comes a warning to us. Right? Because when we start to go down these rabbit holes, sometimes they lead us farther away than we would think. And in a married relationship, this is a natural thing. In a dating relationship especially, where these two are effectively in right now, we've got to be careful about this. So in verse 7, she says, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field. Do not arouse or awaken love until it desires. Now we're going to talk about this more later in a future message, because this is just the beginning of some of her thoughts about him that we're going to get this glimpse inside of. But she's warning her sisters in Israel, her fellow countrywomen, be careful about this. Boy, if you start thinking about this physical intimacy and romanticizing all of this stuff, pretty soon you can get swept away in this. And you might awaken a deep impulse inside of you that the time to fulfill is not currently there. And where these two are dating, they're not married, the time isn't there. So strong caution to us. You know, it's natural, I think, for both sexes to have an inclination towards that. And yet, here, the shepherdess is saying, we got to be careful, ladies, because we can go a little too far in what we're thinking about and what we're fantasizing about. And obviously, this is equally true of men, but there's a danger there. All right, so let's now pick back up in verses 8 through 13. It says, listen, my beloved. Look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands before our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. My beloved spoke and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. See, the winter is past. The rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. Excuse me. The season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. Now here, we seem to have a setting change that happens. And so before, they were having these one-on-one interactions, but like we talked about, throughout this narrative, we're going to see different settings that occur, and we just kind of have to infer what's really happening. And so I'm going to suggest to you at this point that probably they've had this romantic time where she's dreamed about him grabbing a hold of her and kissing her, and now they've gone home, and she's at her house with her family, because they aren't married yet, so they aren't living together, and she sees him off in the distance, and she sees him coming towards her, making his way, walking over the hills towards her house. And she describes him in some terminology that we'll see repeated throughout this. Verse 9, she says, my beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. I don't know how many of you guys have spent time around an animal like a deer, especially when it's in rut, but it's always interesting. I remember the first time I went out deer hunting, we rattled in this deer, and one of my mentors back in Greenville, we were ministering at the time, he did all the rattling, and he told me in advance, just get ready, okay? Because we're going to rattle in this buck, and he's going to come out, and when he comes in, he's going to seem like he's in a huff. And probably what's going to happen is that you might see a glimpse of him, you might see some small part of him, and then he's going to peek out from behind a tree, and you might only have about 3 seconds to actually shoot this. And I've never shot a big game animal before, so this was a first experience. And we were out there about 20 minutes, and Press was rattling these antlers, and pretty soon I could have swore I saw 2 legs sticking out from behind a big tree trunk. And I watched, and pretty soon I realized that was exactly the case. But this deer, he just seemed like he was angry, and he was looking for a fight. I mean, he wanted to be at the top of the ladder in terms of mating rights. And as I watched, you could see the frustration in this animal. Like, I need to find somebody to fight. I don't see the other deer, but he stomped and stomped and looked all around, and it was just clear from his posture. He was looking for some opportunity to come out and to go to battle to win over one of these female does that was in the area. And soon enough, he did peek out from there. And by God's grace, I managed to get a lot of meat to fill our freezer. But when I think about the prowess of those animals, and they'll go around the forest, you'll see signs of them everywhere where they're scraping up and down trees and knocking bark off of them, and they're looking for a fight. And there's almost this sense of imagery with this guy, not necessarily that he's frustrated, but that he is just coming in because he knows what he wants, and he wants her. And so she sees him from a long ways away, like a man with a purpose, coming to come and visit her, to come and see her, and try to win her over. And as he gets there, he has his sales pitch ready. He has his argument for why they should go out on a date that day, and why they should go spend some time together. And from the context, we know that this is 2 godly Hebrew people. This isn't to go run away with me forever, but it's let's go on an adventure together. Let's have a fun date together. And so he starts. She's telling us this story. She's telling us her perception of this. But as she talks about him, she talks about him gazing through the window, looking longingly at her. And he says to her, verse 10, "Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone." Basically, spring's coming. And now he tries to spell that out. Flowers appear on the earth. The season has singing and cooing of doves and is heard in the land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. All of these beautiful images of spring, of new life, of a new beginning. And obviously this is metaphoric for the relationship as well. Their relationship's just beginning. It's in this early period, and if they go step out and go have this adventure together, then they'll come to know each other more, and their relationship can grow and have this new life, just as the earth all around them has this new life. And she is excited, he is excited for them to go run off in this. And for her part, as she speaks about this, we get the sense that she's happy about it too, right? And yet, as we're going to see in a minute, for some reason, she makes the decision not to go off with him. She's spoken so highly of him, and yet, she isn't going to leave and go off with him. So we're going to go to verse 14, and we're going to hear his response to what happens next in the situation. Again, we have the dialogue, and some of the plot points we're going to have to infer. So we look at what classical Jewish scholars have thought about this, and what a lot of the commentaries have said, and we'll try to use that to have some deep understanding here. So we'll now read verse 14 through the end of the chapter. He, my dove in the clefts of the rock, in the hiding places on the mountainside, show me your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes, that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. She, my beloved is mine, and I am his. He browses among the lilies until the day breaks and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or like a stag on the rugged hills. So, first we see his response and his language. Verse 14, my love, and my dove in the clefts of the rock, in the hiding place of the mountainside. Show your face. Let me hear your voice. So, for his part, he's calling out of this window. He's wanting her to come out and to have this romantic date, to go and have this time together. But she's not coming out. He can't even see her face. And so he actually is saying to her that You're like a dove up nesting in the cliffs, up in the clefts of the rock. I'm right here, I'm waiting for you, but if you're going to hide up there, I won't be able to get to you. And so he has this frustration that she's not making the step forward in the relationship, and he voices that. And he says, when thinking about her, that, the second part of verse 14, he says, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Finally, in verse 15, he asks for a call to action on her behalf. And this is going to be our call to action from this passage too. There's a big point behind this. Verse 15, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes, that ruin vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. So the vineyard here represents their relationship. Both of these two are shepherds, and oftentimes in poetic ancient literature, predatory animals that lurk around are used to depict forces that are destructive in relationships. In fact, there are some Egyptian poems that are contemporary to this in which crocodiles roaming through the relationship are used to refer to destructive forces that we allow into those relationships. And here, crocodiles are not prominent in the area around Israel. In fact, they aren't there. But a common predator would have been a fox. This could even be translated as a jackal, even in the Hebrew. And so you have these predatory animals that are running around the vineyard. And if you're a shepherd, the last thing that you want around your vineyard or around your animals is a predator, right? That puts you on edge. There's a reason sheep need a shepherd to protect them, because they're quite susceptible to creatures like this. And in effect, he's saying, our relationship right now, it's young, it's vulnerable, and if you aren't intentional about removing these things that are dividing us, then they're going to tear us apart. Do we allow foxes in our vineyards? Do we allow predatory things into our relationships that tear us apart? We can certainly talk about this with marriage. That's the most applicable. Or with a dating relationship. But even in friendships. Have you guys ever had a friendship with somebody and some destructive force entered it and tore that relationship apart? Ended it. The strange part is, often we allow it. And here in this case, he's seeing her. He wants to go out. He wants to have this fun time with her. He feels like, I'm so in love with you. You seem to be so in love with me. Why can't we go have this date together? Why are you holding back? And for her, we don't have explained exactly what's going on in her heart. We don't know what's holding her back. We see implied in the passage that perhaps her father had passed away because her mother is the one who most of the courting conversations are happening with, and her brothers seem to be in charge of her household, which typically would be something that would be done by the father. Maybe there's a wound that she has related to her father's passing that's holding her back. Maybe it's just fear in this relationship, or fear in general that's keeping her from making the steps. But there's something in that relationship that's keeping it from moving forward. And his call to her through the window of their house is, take these foxes, take hold of them, keep them out of that vineyard. You need to capture them. If you don't, they're going to destroy our relationship. Now we see her final sentiments will betray the fact that her reason isn't that she thinks, I thought you were special before, but I don't really now. It's not about that. So we'll see, she's still very in love with him, and yet there's some dividing force pulling them apart. So verse 16, she said, my beloved is mine, and I am his. He browses among the lilies till the day breaks, and the shadows flee. Now, they're using the terminology lily from before. Of course, the lilies of the field represent the women of the earth. And so perhaps the insecurity here is, I think he might be looking at other girls. I think he might actually have an interest in other girls. And maybe even there's no rational reason for it, but she just thinks, a guy like that with a girl like me, that's just not going to happen. He must be thinking about other women. Obviously he would. Why would he be talking to me? And we do see these deep-seated insecurities throughout the text that would sort of justify that understanding. But whatever it is, she's holding him at arm's length. But yet, as she finishes it out, she says, in verse 17, she says, until the day breaks and the shadows flee, turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged hills. There's a sense in which she's hoping that he'll turn back from him walking away, come back and try to get her again. But she's refused to make this step and to go with him. I don't know how many of you guys have ever encountered a predatory animal before. I remember in elementary school, I grew up out in Ontario, Oregon, and our family had about an 80-acre ranch, a cattle ranch that we grew up on. And each day I'd come home from school, and I had this adopted grandmother named Vital, who one of our twin girls is named after. And she would take care of us every day and feed us. But eventually it'd come time for us to walk up the hill to where our parents' house was, because on this ranch there was a hill, and my folks built their house up on the top of the hill. And anyway, we'd get down at Granny's house down at the bottom of the hill after the bus dropped us off, spend an hour or two there, and then typically we'd voyage home. And one particular day, and I don't even remember what the reason was for it, my older brother wasn't there with me. I was quite young. I would say I was probably a first grader. And it was time for me to walk a quarter mile up the hill, and it wasn't uncommon for me to do that on my own. It was a big secluded property, but it was pretty safe. And I remember starting to walk up the hill, and I got about a quarter of the way up it on the dirt road that led up to my parents' house. And out in the middle of the road was what at first I thought was a dog. And then I realized, no, that's a coyote. And that coyote stood there in the middle of the road. And typically, if you guys have been around coyotes, typically they don't stick around long. But this one was. And it didn't take very long for me to realize. At first I thought, oh cool, I love dogs. Cool, a dog, I should go pet this thing. But pretty soon, even as a first grader, I looked at that thing and thought, I think that thing wants to kill me. That's the look it's got. And if you've ever seen that or felt that sense, it seemed pretty clear that this coyote, maybe he was thinking, I haven't caught enough stray cats lately, but I might be able to take him. And it seemed to be weighing it out. And I remember just being frozen there. And I had this realization hit me, you know, like first grade Lloyd versus a coyote. I put my money on the coyote. I hate to say it, but I think the coyote's got the better chance. In fact, I watched, in my adult years, we had 3 big dogs. One of them was a big Dalmatian. The smallest of them was a border collie. And there was a coyote that ran out and challenged him. And I don't know if it was, if the other coyotes were in heat or what, but this boy ran right out there. And that one coyote kept our 3 big dogs at bay. I mean, it gave them a run for their money. It's a smaller animal than they were, but it just had a ferociousness to it that they weren't ready to deal with. And similarly, I don't think my odds would have been very good with that coyote. It stood there, and in that moment I realized, I think for the first time in my life, I might just die today. There's a real danger here. If this thing decides it's hungry enough and that I'm weak enough, I may be in trouble. And I stood there staring down that coyote for what felt like hours. I'm sure it was actually like 30 seconds, but still, in my first grade mind, it was an eternity. And I wondered, and finally, the thing decided, nope, and it turned and ran off. And I remember just being startled by it. Now, the crazy part is, of course, when you're a little kid and you see a predator like that standing out in your driveway, it inspires some fear, and rightly so. But I'm willing to wager today that a lot of the people here have allowed some of those predators in their relationship, and they're not paying enough attention to it. Right? So I want to give you guys some challenges. I'm going to talk about some things that passively destroy our relationships and some things that actively destroy our relationships, and there's only going to be 4 or 5 of each. But as I discuss some of these and share just some things that I've seen in ministry that are vicious little foxes in your relationships and mine, I want you guys to think for a moment, because Valentine's Day is here, and I would venture that one of the best things that you could do for your significant other, or if you're not in a relationship, then you can use this towards a friend you have. It'll apply equally to a friendship. There are destructive foxes in those relationships too. I want you to think about this and think which one of these is a fox that's in your vineyard. And be praying this week about how you can capture that thing and get it out of there. Because honestly, guys, most of us allow this stuff around and we don't pay attention to it. And it's just as dangerous as that coyote on the road to my house. So let's discuss it. First, let's talk about some of the passive things that destroy our relationships. Something I see frequently. And you guys, I talk with you. I'm not trying to betray anybody's confidence, but I get to have a lot of conversations with you guys about your relationships and where they're at and how things are going. And sometimes when it's not going so well. And so I'm speaking from experience here over the years I've been in ministry. Here's some stuff I see. A lack of effort. A lot of times you guys think by the time we get hitched, it's done. We don't need to worry about it anymore. We don't have to pour any more effort into this. But that's not the case, is it? Those of you who've been married a long time know this, right? You don't get to be married for 20 years or for 40 or 50 years without pouring some effort into the relationship. And it can be really simple to get distracted. There's also a lack of conversation. In the same vein, a lack of conversation, not having regular times where you sit down and talk with your spouse. How much happier could your relationship be if you got up an hour early each morning and just sat down and talked with each other for a little while? Or maybe in the evening, have that time of connection. And so often, what I see is it's actually the distractions in our life that are causing this not to happen. It's that TV show you really want to watch, or that sport that you really like, or that hobby that you have. And none of those things are innately evil. But when you let them rule your heart, when you let them take the time that you should be giving to your wife or even to your children, it'll poison the relationship. It'll have a big effect. Another thing that I frequently see are unresolved issues. And by that I mean, sometimes there's things in our past, experiences that we've had. Maybe your parents divorced when you were young. Maybe you had somebody in your life who's treated you in an abusive or inappropriate way. I think sometimes we really downplay and don't even understand ourselves quite the depth of destruction those things can have in our relationships. And it doesn't mean they eternally have to, but if we're going to move past it, we probably need to seek wise counsel on it. We need to go talk to a godly friend or a pastor, or even go talk to, and I can make some recommendations if you're struggling with this. Go talk to a professional counselor who can walk through this with you. We let these little seeds exist in our relationships, and sometimes what we're fighting with our spouse about is not at all about what's going on. It has to do with something that happened 20 years ago that we never sorted out. And we owe it to the person we're with to take the time to do that. That way we can actually live more healthy, functional relationships. Finally, something I see really commonly is unresolved anger or fear. These are passive things, but if you've got something that your spouse did 2 years ago, and you said you forgive them, but you never actually did, you'll live in that. And it'll be affecting everything you do, and the things that you say, and you might not even realize it. But if you've got some of those unresolved fears or unresolved angers, they're different sides of the same coin, frankly. If you've got the anger, there's probably a fear that drove you there. Then look for that. And again, try to address it with them. Try to talk it through with them. Go seek professional counseling if you need to. It's a normal, natural thing to need wise counsel in your life. It's not something to feel ashamed of. Now let's talk about some of the destructive things that actively destroy our relationships and that we allow. And again, we don't know precisely for this girl what's going on in her heart. It could be any number of these things, but I can say with certainty, most of us have had times where we're going through one of these things, where we're allowing this fox into the vineyard, and we need to stop it. The first one, pornography or risque TV. Guys especially. This is dangerous. And I'm speaking to somebody who has struggled with this in the past myself. When you start taking this stuff in on a regular basis, it changes the way you think about women. It changes the way you treat your wife. It has long-reaching effects on your psychological well-being and your capacity to lead and be the man you're supposed to be in your family. If you're struggling with this, you're not a monster, you're not a horrible person, but you need help. And so you need to just go have some conversations and address it. This would be a wonderful fox to get out of the vineyard this Valentine's Day. Don't let it be there. Come and get help for it. Turn it over to God. Another thing, and this is the opposite side of the coin, especially for women. Some of these female fantasy novels and TV shows, I'm just going to go ahead and say one out loud. How about Desperate Housewives? Or Grey's Anatomy, or some of these shows. Some of these things give us totally unrealistic expectations for what relationships are going to be like. I'm not saying if you watch it, you're going to hell. What I am saying is you've got to be careful, because oftentimes part of what sells TV is a fantasy, right? It's a fantasy that this could be the way it really is. And I have watched women come and watch one of these shows to the end where they finally decide, since my husband doesn't act like this literary caricature, obviously he doesn't actually care about me. Obviously he wants to move past this relationship. I need to find the real thing, and then I'll be happy. And man, this is destructive. Be careful, guys and girls, men and women. Be careful what you're taking in, what you're ingesting, the lies that you are actually starting to believe, whether you really believe them to begin with or not. You watch enough seasons or read enough of these books, you'll start to get there. You'll find yourself there in no time. Here's another big one. Inappropriate relationships with people, especially people of the opposite sex. You might think you're just friends, guys, with that girl at work, but you guys don't need to be going out together getting lunch on a date. That's not something a married guy does. Now I know the world will say that's fine. They'll say I'm being a prude to say that. But the reality is, for both sexes, we can go out and we can start forming meaningful relationships with people of the opposite sex, and the natural thing that starts to come from that is comparing. and we start comparing the idea of what that relationship could be to the reality of what this relationship is, or what in our anger we believe it is, and pretty soon we will actively destroy our relationship. We'll tear it apart. You guys have to put good boundaries in place. Think about how you're relating to people of the opposite sex and what opportunities you're giving, even for a thought of something that involves impropriety going on, whether it's happening or not. And finally, the last thing I want to share with you, and you'll have to forgive my bluntness in this. The last thing I want to share with you, and again, be thinking about whether any of these things is in your relationship. I think that sometimes in relationships, especially married relationships, I'm specifically talking to married couples here because they have a license to do this, but abstaining from sex. Now there can be a time where you have in your relationship where you both mutually agree that maybe you're not going to do something like that. Paul talks about that, how there could be an occasion where that happens. But if, especially for our young couples here, if you guys have gone a month or two and nothing has happened in that way, that can cause a weird division. God designed sex to be a glue in relationships. I'm sorry, I'm your pastor, but I'm going to speak real frankly here. He designed sex to be a glue in your relationship. He meant to bond you together. And if you guys aren't being intimate at all, that's going to be driving your relationship apart. If this is the one you're struggling with, I have some rather blunt advice. All right, bear with me here. Go home, take off your clothes, hug, and see where things go from there. But it needs to be addressed. All right. Now, I mentioned these 9 different foxes. These 9 different foxes that are in your relationship. By the way, we go through Song of Songs. We're going to boost the birth rate among the young people. I'm going to grow this church from the inside or the outside. That's my part. Five kids under 5, you know. Anyway, but this Valentine's Day, there are a lot of things that may be in your relationship and may be poisoning it. And I want to challenge you to be ruthless and be prayerful today, looking for what those things are and looking for the opportunities to root those out. Valentine's can be a nice day of good sentiments, but that's not good enough. If you really want to focus on love, and especially marital love during this time, but even in your dating relationships, then look for these things and address them. To be frank, for some of you people that are dating, if you're in a dating relationship and you've got stuff like this going on in the background, you may not be ready to have the relationship you ultimately want to have. There may be a real question there. And that doesn't mean you're a horrible person, but it means that God today is giving you an opportunity to have that realization and to get yourself in the right place. Because when 2 broken people enter a relationship like that, and if we're honest about it, both of us will be broken, no matter the marriage. It's just a matter of how much. Inevitably, there's going to be some friction that happens. But if one of you is utterly destroyed walking into it, it's not going to bear good fruit. It's not going to make things easier. And today, if you focus on these things, God can use that as an opportunity to heal you, to bring those things into His will, and to bring your relationship to a new level that's never been before. So that's my challenge for you today. I'm going to go ahead and ask one of our leaders, Tim, to come up here and lead us in our time of communion and offering in a moment. I'll ask our deacons to come forward too. As they do that, I'll ask you guys to go ahead and join me for a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father, way too often we take our hobbies or the things we're passionate about are in our life, and we focus more on perfecting them than our marriage, than our dating relationships. Lord, please give us hearts for you. Give us the courage not to look at our neighbor, but to look at ourselves, not to look at our spouse, but to look at ourselves and to see the brokenness that's still there, because we know that there are foxes in our relationships that are wreaking havoc in our vineyards. And we don't want to be the victim of those predators, Lord. We have your warning today that we can take a hold of those things, and we pray for the courage to do exactly that. Father, please guide our hearts. And Father, I pray that for each person in this church, that whether they have not started a relationship yet or whether they're 60 years into it, that you would continue to build them up to where they can be in a place where their relationship is a testimony not just to them, but even more, Lord, to you and to your incredible power to heal, to restore, and to even make broken things new. Father, we pray these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.